Hi, it's Kristen, and this is the Eras Tour Reading Challenge. I came up with this challenge just for fun for myself. Got a couple of prompt helps from my Swiftie sister and one of my best friends who's also very into Taylor Swift. So, a couple of caveats at the beginning of this. One, this video idea I came up with ages ago, and then actually doing this video has taken me like a year between like just being busy, needing to be in the mood to read the books that I've chosen for this, and like making other videos and reading other things for other videos. It has taken me like a year to do this. So in the clips for each book, each prompt, you will notice some changes in my appearance. When I started this was when I had my long hair, and then obviously I got it cut short and it started growing back out again. So I've really gone through a hair journey in this video, and because of the way I filmed it and like trying to mood read things, I did not read these books chronologically in the order I'm going to explain to you. So I go from different hair length, never this, what is that? But different hair lengths throughout this video. So just, bear that in mind. That's the first caveat. Second caveat, in terms of like the length of this, I obviously had this video idea like a year ago. Taylor Swift was doing the Eras tour in the US, and she had, I think, just announced or was announcing the European dates when I started reading for this vlog. But obviously since then, we've had the European dates. I have been to the Eras tour. Whereas, yeah, when I started filming for this, that was a pipe dream. That was wouldn't it be great if I could go see Taylor Swift? Never thinking it would actually happen. And now I've seen Taylor Swift, so that's a little wild. So yeah, this has been over a very long time. So another thing that makes this like a caveat is that she was obviously touring. She had her 10 albums out when I started this, so I came up with prompts for each album. But then obviously earlier this year she announced Torture Poets Department and has brought that out since then. That was not a thing, that didn't exist. We didn't even know about that when I came up with these prompts, so that shows how long it took me to get around to doing this. So I'll add a little bonus thing in at the end. So each album has a reading prompt, which I followed, themed to the album. Some are like more consistent themes than others. I think better themes than others. Some are more general, some are more specific. But so we have for debut Taylor Swift, read an autobiography. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Her self-titled album, read an autobiography. For fearless as a prompt, I have read something scary, or something that you personally have a fear of, and if you read it and you get through that book, you're fearless. Prompt 3, speak now, is listen to an audiobook. Then for read something with a red cover. That one's more general. Read something with a red cover. For 1989, we have read something set in the past. Bonus points if it's set in the 80s. There's no such thing as points in this reading challenge, but bonus points if you read something set in the 80s. For reputation, I am going to be reading a book that has like a reputation on the internet. Something that's either loved or hated kind of thing. So something that's very, popular or very looked down on. Or like one of those books that could be both, like a Marmite book maybe. But something that is like hyped or generally people know about that book. For lover, read a romance. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory. Then for folklore, you need to read something based on folklore, myth, legend, like a retelling or an original text. Could be either. For Evermore, it's to read a book where like time is a prominent like concept or setting or something like that, something where time is an important element. So it could be a book where maybe the whole thing takes place in 24 hours and it's important that it takes place in those 24 hours, or a book that involves time travel, or it like flits between two different time periods, like there's a present day and a past, something like that. So this one I feel like can be interpreted in different ways. And then for Midnights, I pick a story that's very like character driven, because I feel like a lot of Midnights is quite, I don't know, self-reflective, or I mean a lot of Taylor Swift's writing is about her feelings and her experiences, obviously throughout all her albums, but especially with songs like, you know, Anti-Hero, it's very self-critical, but is very like about the person, about her. But if we track that to a character, something that's very character driven, where maybe there's not a ton of plot, but like the plot is the characters. So yeah, that's that. That's the prompts I had for each of the albums that were out at the time that I made this challenge. Obviously, Torture Poets Department has since come out, so a bonus challenge, if you would like to do Torture Poets Department, would be, I guess, just to read a poetry book. I'm not going to be doing that in this vlog. I am currently reading a poetry book, so that is happening in my life. I am currently reading a poetry book, but I felt that this would go on forever if I included a poetry book, because I dip in and out of poetry books. I don't read like all the way through. So if you are a poetry person, or you want to like push yourself to read more poetry, even if you aren't a poetry person, then you can do the bonus prompt for Torture Poets Department and read some poetry. I also had another bonus, which I thought was fun. I probably, again, won't do it in this vlog, but I've noticed recently so many books coming out with like the titles of Taylor Swift songs, or like some song lyrics in it. So originally I came with this prompt and I was like, I don't know how you do it. I have a book that's called Reputation, so I was like, that works. I have a book that's called like The Mad Woman's Ball, so I was like, you know, Mad Woman, that song. But since coming up with that, there's been so many books coming out that are called like It's Different, I Knew You Were Trouble, that. So an extra bonus prompt is to pick a book that has a title that's either an album title or a song title as the book title. So that is it. Those are all the prompts. You will now see me through a passage of time, through the span of a year, basically reading these books and reviewing each book and giving you my thoughts on them. The Taylor Swift angle of this is basically just a fun way to do the prompts, and maybe at the end I will share some stuff from the Eras tour that is completely unrelated to the rest of this reading aspect. But yeah, if you want to do any of these prompts, like if you think this is a fun reading challenge, I think that would be really fun. I just did this for myself, but by all means, join in. Now let's get into the challenge. So first up we have Debut, which is to read an autobiography. So I read As You Wish by Cary Elwes. He wrote this with Jo Layden, and there's a foreword by Rob Reiner. So this is a memoir talking about how Cary Elwes became part of The Princess Bride, the movie, and how that movie came about, his involvement, and then the filming, and a little bit of the math, the afterwards of the film, the marketing, how it was received over the years, stuff like that. This I really enjoyed. I think Cary Elwes has a very fun voice. He writes, and Joe Layden, I don't know how much they wrote together on this, but I think there's a very fun voice. Everything, for the most part, is told chronologically, so it's easy to follow the narrative of the filming. There's fun insights from other people involved with the film. So in moments throughout the book, there's these little cutaways where whatever Cary Elwes is talking about, whether it be a scene from the film, an actor on the film, William Goldman, who wrote the book and the screenplay, whatever he's talking about, we have insights from other people involved in the making of the film. There are some moments in here that are very sweet but sad, especially when he writes about Andre the Giant, who passed away years ago, but that, judging by this, everyone loved him. So those bits were very sweet to hear the stories, but sad because they're more talking about, like, reflecting and talking about loss and things like that. But overall, very fun. If you like The Princess Bride, like, it's one of my, it falls into like my favourite genre of film, which is like action adventure where the love story is like a big part of the plot. I would really recommend reading this because there's a lot of fun insights, behind the scenes stuff, talking about the making of the film, and then like how people got cast, their interactions with each other, how certain changes to scenes came about, why what you see on screen happened the way it did, and all that kind of stuff. So this was just very interesting. I would highly recommend it. Very glad I read it. Definitely one that I feel like I would even revisit. It's made me want to rewatch the film, so I think I'm gonna do that soon. That is the first prompt for autobiography memoir, as you wish. Next up we have the fearless prompt, which was to read a book with a subject matter that scares you, frightens you, something that you fear. So I went with Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This one is split perspective, dual POV. We're in the present day with a woman called Miri, who is looking after her wife Leah after Leah has been out on a deep sea dive expedition, research mission kind of thing, and has come back, and something is up with her, but she's not talking about what. She won't really communicate, she's very off, and Miri just doesn't know what's going on. And then we get, like, every other chapter is Leah in the past on that mission, where something goes wrong. So in terms of like what about the story makes me scared,
we've got a few things. Deep sea, like deep open water, freaks me out. Absolutely freaks me out. So that aspect of it. And then when they go down, I don't know what you'd call it, a ship, submarine vessel that they're on, shuts down, and they are trapped, no way to communicate, no way to get out of there. So, like, being trapped in a confined space with, like, no obvious way to escape, that also freaks me out. So, like, those things together, I'm panicking. And there's also that element of when they're down there, when everything's shut off, they're in like deep sea, so they can't see anything out of the sort of viewing hatches and windows they have. It's just darkness. Darkness also freaks me out. So this scenario is just nightmare fuel for me. Yeah, not something I would ever want to do, or I can't even get my mind around why you would want to. So yes, that is where the fearful element comes into it. So we have that from Leah's perspective. It's very creepy, very atmospheric, her chapters. There's definitely like a sense of dread, and even when she's talking about things like just not happening, like the mundane day-to-day that it becomes of them being trapped down there, there's this really eerie sense building with her and her two crewmates. Yeah, I thought her chapters were very atmospheric, really built tension, because you wanted to know what was going on. You sense that it was building to something, but also because you have Miri's chapters, which Leah is in the present day, you know that Leah gets out, but you also know that something happens maybe to her and her crewmates before they get out, in that she is not the same as she was when she went down. So I thought her chapters were great. I think I preferred her chapters, but I still liked Miri's chapters. Miri's chapters are just a lot sadder. They're longer than Leah's chapters, and they just show Miri trying to grapple with the idea that her wife is still her wife, but isn't her wife anymore. She's not the Leah that she always knew. And not just in a sense that like something traumatic happened and Leah's really changed from that, but in the sense that there's something potentially like otherworldly, something supernatural or like biologically different about her that you sort of see changing slowly throughout the book, and Miri sees happening, and it's all just very sad. I would say the whole book just has this sense of melancholy to it. It's a very beautifully written novel, but just has this sadness throughout it of you're sort of reading it, and as you read it you get the sense of like, don't fully know what's gone on, don't know if you will ever fully know what's gone on, and this like depressing sense of don't know if, how, when this would ever be fixed, whatever's happened. And yeah, it's just about like grieving a person when they're missing but not dead, because Miri also sort of looks back on while Leah was gone and was initially, she was told the research mission was just taking longer than they'd expected, but then she's like, when it goes on for so long, she's sort of like, is she dead? If she's not, why is she not here? If she is, will I ever know? And yeah, that sense of grieving someone while they're just missing, can you properly grieve them? And then when they are back, but they're not how they were, and there's obviously something very wrong, and they're not the person they were, and they're not responsive to you in the way that they were, and the relationships completely changed or fallen apart, all that kind of stuff. That's a type of grief too. And I thought it was really beautifully written. I did finish it and just feel very sad though. Yeah, it's one of those books that there's not much happiness in it. There's some sweet flashbacks between Leah and Miri, but even in those like nice happy moments where you're like, what a lovely relationship they had, it's, you know, in the viewpoint of, but now we know that they don't have that anymore, and Leah has changed and the relationship's changed, and it's not what it was, they aren't what they were. So all those happy moments are lovely to see, but tinged as we view it as the reader, in that we know that that's not a thing anymore. So yeah, left me feeling very sad. I think I would give it like a 3.5. I wanted to love it more than I did, but I still enjoyed it. I think if you like atmospheric, I think it's technically classed as horror. If you like atmospheric, light horror, the kind of horror that's more eerie than scary and more speculative, where you don't necessarily get all the answers, and ones that are very focused on like actually the people and their reactions to things and their emotions and sadness and grief and fear and that kind of stuff, rather than like, here's a big scary thing that's happening or a monster or anything like that. Yeah, I think you might enjoy this one. Also, the cover is just absolutely stunning. Like, it's beautiful. I love this. I wish I had this book physically, because it's just stunning. So yes, that was what I read for my Fearless read a book that scares you thing. Darkness, deep open water, being trapped, horrifying. And then, you know, if you want to take the sadness and grief angle, that's always kind of scary. So that was my pick for Fearless. We are in the Speak Now portion of the video. The prompt for this one was to listen to an audiobook, to read an audiobook. I decided to read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So this one is a non-fiction memoir about George M. Johnson's life. It explores identity, his identity as a black boy becoming a black man, and his identities as a queer person, and how those two big parts of who he is can be separate, but also how they intersect. It talks a lot about family and his connections and relationships with his family, be they really good, just loving, supportive connections, or sort of questionable or damaging or sad relationships. It talks a lot about family and friends and community, and how he's experienced those things at different points in his life. I really liked it. I thought it was great. He reads the audiobook himself, and the audiobook is actually quite short. It was like 5 hours something, maybe like closer to 6 hours, but under 6 hours. I think he writes in a very accessible way. He has a great narrative voice as well. It was very much like him being like informative but also quite conversational, I felt, in the way that he wrote it and then read it. He does tell some pretty sad stories. There's like variations of trauma that he's experienced. He tells stories about how he's young and went through like moments of sort of bullying or violence when he was very young, and then as he got older he experienced some very intense sexual assaults. There's like a whole chapter on an experience he had as a sort of 12-13-year-old boy, that was just very, very difficult to listen to. He talks about how those have shaped relationships he's gone on to have, or the way he perceives relationships. And he talks about family member illnesses, and towards the end there's a whole chapter about the death of one of his friends, and how it was like the first time he really had to face death, face the death of someone that he knew very closely to him. So there's a lot of really intense, sad, traumatic topics that he talks about. So I wouldn't say that this is like an enjoyable book. I thought it was very good, very well written, spoke about the things it does speak about very well, but it is very intense, sad, reflective, but also I think hopeful. I don't think he leaves things on a super sad note. He doesn't like repeatedly tell you all his trauma and then be like, and there we go. He's very nuanced in the way he talks about things, which I think is the sign of a very good writer. That, you know, you listen to all this really horrible stuff to listen to, but there's always a message, or he talks about how his perspective on things has changed and how he's grown and not necessarily got past things, but how his thinking about them has changed just in order for him to be okay, and like aiming for a healthier way of looking at things. But he's also very validating in that he says, like, if this isn't how you've reacted to trauma you've experienced, whether they're like similar to his or not, like, that's okay. You don't need to forgive people who do stuff to you. You don't have to think that you'll ever be okay with things that have happened to you. I think he's a very empathetic writer, so I think that was good. So yeah, if you can handle those sort of topics, there's a lot of racism, homophobia, obviously, because he's mostly talking about his identity as a queer black man. There's racial and homophobic slurs, which he sort of discusses the use of. There's, violence, sexual assault on him as a child, death, lots of very heavy topics. He deals with them, like I said, I think well. Again, I can't talk to all of it though, because I've not experienced the things he's experienced, but I did think the book was well written and just overall like a really impressive memoir. Sometimes I read or listen to memoirs and I'm sort of like, why was this written? But I came out from this one thinking, wow, what a writer, what a nuanced, empathetic, incredible way to write your own story. I personally really like listening to memoirs on audiobook when it's read by the person who's written it, because I think, you know, they know their story best. So when I listen to audiobooks and I want non-fiction, I will tend to skew towards memoirs, or people at least like somewhat writing about their own experiences. I think this was a very good one. It was short, so if like the idea of a long audiobook puts you off, this one was like fairly short. And yeah, just very good. That's this prompt done.
So next up we have Red as an album, and the prompt for this one was to read a book with red on the cover. So I went for Happy Hour by Marlo Granados. Obviously the tablecloth here is red. Red is the prominent colour on this book. So Happy Hour is about two young women, Issa and Gala, who move to New York and decide that they're gonna like make the city their own. And so we flip between them like in the daytime, trying to like hustle, make money in like any way that they can. So they have like a market stall that they sell clothes at, but Issa also takes on some work as like a life painting model. And so yeah, during the day they're just trying to like make money any way they can while being like fashionable, cool girls. And then in the evenings they're constantly meeting new people, going out for drinks, going to the latest bar, going to a new club, and sort of like just being seen. And that's pretty much all it's about. If you like books where there's not a ton of plot, or the plot is just like the characters' day-to-day lives, then that's what this is. There's no like big action, there's no massive plot points other than just these characters, their relationships with each other. It's all told from like Issa's perspective, so that is the prominent character we get in here, and then Gala's her friend, who she lives with. And yeah, it's just about them making friends, or making like friends, and living in New York and navigating the city and relationships and things. I quite liked this one. I found it very like atmospheric. I definitely got swept up in like the atmosphere and the vibe of things, and it did feel very like cool girl kind of. Had that kind of feeling to it. It reminded me a lot of the way that Sally Rooney writes, in that character does get quite like introspective and has like these sort of profound feeling thoughts on life and relationships and stuff. And there were some like really great like sentences that you could pull quotes from in here. But there is definitely like almost a barrier, because the character is like wants to be seen a certain way. There's almost like a barrier in the writing, of not getting like too deep or vulnerable. And yeah, definitely reminded me of the way that Sally Rooney writes. I think if you like Sally Rooney, especially like Conversations with Friends and Beautiful World, Where Are You, because of the relationship between the two female friends, then you might like this. I think it also reminded me a bit of Writers and Lovers by Lily King. So if you like those books, you potentially will like this one. I think I saw a review as well of someone who said that it reminded them a bit of Broad City, the TV show. Not the comedy aspect of it, I would say, but the like premise of two girls navigating the city and like the city being almost a character in itself, and like such a prominent setting. Which I, yeah, agree with. I think there's aspects of that sort of dynamic in here. It also gave me a similar vibe, or there were parts to it that just sort of reminded me of the Netflix show Girl Boss, which was based off that like non-fiction book by Sophia Amoruso, who like created Nasty Gal. But it reminded me of that in terms of, again, the female friendship being like very close. They really relied on each other in some aspects, but maybe in others it was a little bit toxic of a relationship. But in terms of, there's like a lot of scenes in Girl Boss where they're like hustling to make money, and then when they do have any amount of money, they'll spend it on like fashion and clothes and then going out to drink. Which, yeah, I thought it definitely reminded me of Girl Boss and this. It's one of those books that I don't necessarily think I liked any of the characters, but I did also feel sympathetic towards them. The best friend Gala annoyed me a lot, and I was really on Issa's side when Issa was talking about how like she is the one who provides a lot of the time, and she's the one who was like really trying to make the money, whereas Gala just has this sort of like, oh, things will just work out mentality. And Issa was like, no, like we're gonna lose where we live if we don't pay the money, and like I have my share of the money, you don't have your share. I'm fed up of like providing for you. That's not my problem anymore. So there were like conflicts between the characters as well. This also dealt with like a bit of racism and classism, because Issa is not white, but a lot of the other characters in here are. And so there are certain characters who see her as like being exotic in a way. And so she sort of deals with how that makes her feel. And then because she like shares a room with her best friend and that's all they can afford, and they're trying to make money and they struggle to make money sometimes, but she does have some like wealthy friends. There are moments in here where those friends like jokingly say stuff to her about like her not having money, or her like needing, like they'll pay for her but then she needs to like pay back in being the entertainment, like being charming and fun and flirty, and that's how she can like be worth it in a way. So there were interesting looks at those kind of themes in here. I enjoyed it. I think it's like a 3.25. Enjoyable enough. I think it's one of those ones that's like kind of odd to me in that I didn't love it, but it was okay. It was decent. But I do think I'm going to think about it a lot, and because I got really swept up in the atmosphere and the vibe of it, I think it might be one that like maybe I revisit again in like not too like maybe in a year's time. It's set over the summer, which I didn't necessarily realise. It's just been on my TBR for ages, and I was like, I'm finally going to get to it for this video. But it was the perfect time to read it because, you know, there are moments where she's talking about how hot and stuffy the city is, and like we currently have quite warm, stuffy weather. So if you have it and you're wondering when to read it, I would definitely recommend reading it over the summer. I think that was fun. They're so sociable and meet new people constantly in here, despite the fact that they're actually quite young. They're like 21. It has made me think I should maybe go out for drinks with my friends. But yeah, this was entertaining. That is like definitely a word I would use to describe it. So I was very entertained by this, and that is the red prompt. We are now on to the 1989 prompt, and this is to read a book that is set in the past. And I went for a book that was actually set in the 80s because I thought that would be fun, or like even better connection. So bonus points if your book is set in the 80s. I read Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart. This takes place, actually starts off in 1992, and then we go back from 1981, 1982, 1989, and then 1992 again. So this is about Shuggie Bain and his family, and him growing up in Glasgow in the 80s, early 90s, and sort of classism and being working class and the struggles that his family faced. Obviously the political climate at the time was that Thatcher was the Prime Minister, and if you know anything about UK politics, you know sort of what that meant to a lot of people, the connotations of that. It was not a good time for a lot of working class people. They talk in this book about some of the mines being shut down, and so it's just a very tumultuous political time for the characters in this book. And then on top of that, we have Shuggie's mum, who is an alcoholic, and so it's like Shuggie and his older siblings just dealing with their mum being an alcoholic and what that means for their family, what that means for their view of her. And yeah, this is a tough read if you didn't gather from the synopsis. It deals with a lot of intense feelings and circumstances. Obviously we have them being in a really difficult financial position, which puts a lot of stress on the family. We have Shuggie's mum, who is dealing with alcoholism and being an addict. We have some cases of sexual assault in here. Shuggie is pretty heavily bullied in a way that revolves a lot around like homophobia, and you know, kids perceive him as being not like them, and so he's like, he must be gay, and there's a lot of trigger warnings around this book, so definitely look up trigger warnings before delving into this. This I struggled to get into at first, and so then I switched from reading it physically to reading the audiobook, and that really helped me get into the story. The audiobook narrator was great. I thought he did a really great job at narrating the story, and made the characters feel very real. So I would recommend the audiobook. It's a tough read. Like, at no point did I feel like I was having fun or enjoying myself. That's not the nature of this book. It's not going to make you feel those things. I do think it was an important read. I'm glad I read it, but I didn't have fun while reading it. Given the topics and the way that Douglas Stewart delves into things, and also just the way he writes. Some of what he wrote was like written in a way that I just thought was so striking and purposeful, and like almost like took me off guard, and I felt really like what he was saying felt really profound and really hit me, struck a chord with me. And then some of the way he writes just made me feel really uncomfortable, which is the purpose of it. But there's like a lot of points where he just talks about like bodily fluids, or like people like picking their noses, and like, which just, I get grossed out by stuff like that really easily. And so it would get to those points and I was like, ooh. But that being said, it felt very purposeful still, because it was like really painting a picture, really like setting the tone for what was going on in that scene or with that character. It felt very purposeful, very real, very raw, and yeah, made me feel uncomfortable, which is the point, I think, of what he was trying to do. And then, yeah, like I said, other bits just sort of knocked me, because they were so beautifully, sadly, realistically written. All the characters in this feel very much like real people, and it's just so sad, the main story. Shuggy is just this kid who's like really trying and really wants what's best for his mum, and there are like moments of hope in here where Agnes, his mum, like isn't drinking, or she's really trying to make an effort, and you just want to like cling to those moments along with Shuggy and her kids, and then something will happen and she starts drinking again, and Shuggy's still clinging to that, like, but I know she can go months without drinking. So while other characters are like, she's a lost cause, like we can't continue to look after her if she's not going to look after us, and that kind of thing. And it's just, yeah, very hopeless feeling. It's not a good time. But I am glad I read it. It won the 2020 Booker Prize, so obviously other people think it's a worthwhile read. It feels important to have read it. I don't think it's one that I will ever reread, and it's not one that I will like widely recommend, because it just felt so sad and so, yeah, hopeless, and like the whole time you're reading it, you know it's not going to go anywhere good, you know. So it is a difficult one to read, but I am glad I read it. I'm glad it's off my TBR. I'm glad I can like now go out and read other people's reviews, because I think that I'm struggling, I think, to articulate exactly how I felt about it. I think reading other reviews and other people's insights will be interesting. So yeah, a very difficult read, but an important one. But one I think you really have to be in the right headspace to go into. But yeah, that was my read for my 1989 prompt, which is a fun album. This was not a fun book. So it worked out in like time wise, but not theme wise with Taylor Swift. But yes, that was 1989. We are in the Reputation era now, and for the Reputation prompt, it was to read something that has a reputation, like good or bad. You know, people have been talking about it. It's been discussed. There's been discourse around it. So I read The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This is about a woman called Olive who is a PhD student at Stanford, and she goes on a couple of dates with this guy, and he actually hits it off with her best friend, and it gets a bit complicated, and so she decides to like encourage her best friend to date this guy by proving that she is over him. So she decides to just like kiss the next guy she sees who her best friend will see her kissing, and she can be like, oh, I'm dating this guy instead. And she ends up doing that with one of the doctors where she works. He's not like directly involved in any of her like studies or anything. He's not her professor, but he is a faculty member in like the labs in the building where she is a PhD student. So obviously that's a complicated situation. And if I'm being honest, I never really got past that as a reason to be like kind of icked out a bit by the premise, because I just think about like the you know, connotations of that, the repercussions of that, and like they touch upon it, but no one ever particularly makes a big deal of the fact that this like man in a position of power is dating a student, and it's like it's not his student, but he like runs the labs of her peers, and you know, the characters do talk about some of the implications of that, and like a character gets mad at her because he like fails this guy, or like says he needs to do more research, and so the guy gets pissed at her because he's like, your boyfriend sucks, like her fake boyfriend. But it's never like made that big of a deal of, and everyone's just quite supportive of it, and I was just like, no, I don't I don't think I would be. I'd be looking at that thinking, that's questionable, that's suspicious, that's not ethically great. Like legally, I guess, like they're both fully adults. She's 26, he's 34, so they're both adults. I just found it a bit icky if I'm being totally honest. So I never fully got past that to find it like cute and romantic and all that stuff. There was so many moments in this that just made me like cringe and like the setups for it. So each chapter starts with like a little bit that says like, hypothesis, if XYZ happens, I'll feel ABC about it. And then like the chapter sort of is the situation that the hypothesis describes, and some of the hypotheses that like set up the chapter just made me go like, oh no, I know what's coming and I don't want to read it. So for example, one of the hypotheses was hypothesis, there will be a significant positive correlation between the amount of sunscreen poured in my hands and the intensity of my desire to murder Anne. And it's like, you just know from that setup that she's gonna have to like put sunscreen on Adam, our main dude, and like just going into the chapter knowing that that was going to happen made me like uncomfortable. I don't know, there were just several situations that I was like, why is no one questioning this? This is like so painfully awkward, and I am someone who does not deal well with like secondhand embarrassment, and there were quite a lot of moments in this I was just like, ooh, gotta push through this because it's making me so you may be able to tell I didn't particularly like this one. It was very readable. It honestly kept me like wanting to read, and I wanted to finish it. And so it was quite engaging in the way it was written, but like the content I didn't particularly like. The characters, while some of their banter was cute, they both annoyed me. There was so much like miscommunication, or like not even necessarily that, just like people not talking to each other about important things, which irritated me. Our main characters are supposed to be like really smart, obviously, because they're scientists, and yet some things, some of their thought processes, I was like, come on, guys, get it together. So yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of this one. I also don't know how I feel about the sex scene, because like while I did appreciate that he like was asking permission to like kiss her or like progress things, and he was like checking in with her, her like internal monologue throughout it all was like so anxiety inducing in me, because she was just like, what if this goes wrong? I'm not used to this. Which like makes sense as a character, because she hasn't had a lot of sex. She's, I believe, like demisexual, so she only has sex with people that she really feels connected to, and so it's a big thing for her. But her like whole anxious internal monologue was just stressing me out. And there were also a couple of bits where I just like couldn't work out like what the like the positions were on about, because they were like stood up kissing, and then it was like he kissed lower, and I was like, okay, is he still stood up, or is he like knelt on his knees, and then they were kissing on the mouth again, so I was like, oh, he must have just been like bending. And then there was like, oh, like he kissed her hip, and I was like, or like he rested his forehead on her sternum. I was like, so he must be kneeling, but there was no line where it was like, and then he knelt down. So yeah, there were a couple of points like throughout that scene that I was like, where are they both in relation to each other? But it was not the worst sex scene I've ever read, but definitely not the best. It was also a bit where like, I'm aware that she as a character can have like a very small chest, women do, but there was like a bit where it says he like put her entire breast in his mouth, and I was just like, is that supposed to be sexy? Because it's not. But anyway, so yeah, if you like cute, kind of cringy romances that also have like some very serious elements, there's like the whole reason she's doing her study on like pancreatic cancer is because her mum died from pancreatic cancer, so trigger warning for cancer. And then there's also like a whole big thing towards the end involving some sexual harassment, so I wasn't expecting that. So if that's something that again might trigger you, or you might need to be aware of or be sensitive to, then that is in there. But this felt appropriate to read for like Reputation, off the prompt of it has quite the reputation, love it or hate it, but also because it was about love, and I think Reputation, people see it as like a revenge album, but actually like a lot of it is love songs, made up of love songs. So it's felt like an appropriate book to read. I do fall on the side of not liking this one. So there we go, that's Reputation.
So now it's time for the lover prompt, which is to read a romance book. And I decided to read Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I've read Christina Lauren before, didn't love the book I read, but I thought the premise of this one sounded quite cute when I heard about it when it came out originally. This is about Josh and Hazel. They knew each other in college, sort of vaguely, and lost touch, and then meet again several years later, and Hazel sort of forces a friendship again, and they become friends and decide to embark on a double dating situation where they set each other up with friends or like cute acquaintances, people they sort of know that they think would be maybe a good match for the other. And throughout all the dates and the scenarios and their just regular friendship, they find that the best parts of their dates, or the bits they enjoy the most, are actually spending time with each other. So I feel like you can see where this is going. This was very sweet. It took me a little bit to get into it because straight off the bat, Hazel is a very quirky character. She sort of says any thought that pops into her head, no matter how appropriate for the situation it actually is. She, very much speaks her mind, is a bit wacky, and I wasn't sure if initially I just thought she was a bit too much. But then we learn more about her. We learn about her insecurities, in that sometimes she thinks she's too much for people. But that Josh finds that he very much still likes her, very much likes her that way. So it took me a couple of chapters to get into it, but once I did, I was very much interested. I liked their friendship, I liked their dynamic. Not like the best ever romance couple that I've ever read, but I thought they were quite sweet together. I'm not normally huge on the friends to lovers trope. It's not my preferred trope. So going into this, I wasn't expecting to love it, but I did like their dynamic, I thought, as friends and then becoming more. I thought they were like believable as a friends to lovers situation. Going into this, I also knew the sort of, not twist, but the plot element that happens towards the end that I know people either like or don't mind, or it ruins the book for people. I'd heard that said, and then I watched a review and someone actually said what the thing was, because they mentioned it as a trigger warning, because I think that's valid as a trigger warning. So I'm going to discuss that a little bit. I'm going to hold my hand up here while I discuss spoilers in case you don't want to be spoiled, and then when I put my hand down, if you like scribble all ahead, is when I will not be talking about it. So when my hand's up, I'm talking about spoilers. So the thing that happens towards the end is accidental pregnancy. There's a couple of sex scenes between Josh and Hazel. Both times they don't use protection, they don't use condoms. And the first time they have sex, Josh like queries this. He's like, oh shit, we didn't use condoms. And Hazel goes, no, it's okay, I'm on the pill, like that's all good. And then it gets to a point later down the line where Hazel realizes that she's not had a period for like 2 months. And she goes to the doctor and she finds out she's pregnant. And she is really happy about it. She's like, yeah, I'm gonna have this baby. My sort of issue with that, I went into it knowing that was the plot, so like I can't be like, oh, that ruined it for me, because like I did that to myself. I knew going into it that was an element of it, so I wasn't like mad at it. I don't love that trope, but I'd like prepared myself for it. What did sort of annoy me is that Hazel finds out she's pregnant. Josh comes to see her for like a completely different reason. He's there to like confess his love and all that kind of stuff, as people often do at the end of romance books. And so she's like, I've got to tell him. And then she doesn't. immediately. He says he loves her, she says she loves him back. And then they have sex again. And then an issue occurs after they've had sex that really worries Hazel about the pregnancy. And so in the morning she decides to go to see the doctor. And again, doesn't tell Josh. And then he finds out himself when he like sees a receipt for a pregnancy test and then finds the baby scan. And then he talks to her, and he's very understanding. Because I would be pissed if someone kept something like that from me. Because it's her body, it's her choice whether she keeps it or not. That's absolutely her choice. But to know and to be prepared to tell him and then not tell him for like 24 hours. Because, yeah, he's then very understanding. He goes with her to the hospital, and that's sort of where the book ends. And then there's an epilogue of them happily married years later with 2 children. So, yeah. But I don't think that final plot element, the baby, was needed, really. I feel like it really shifted the tone of what we'd had in the book so far. Because up until then, you know, they talked about serious stuff. They talked about, like, how they see themselves. They talked about previous partners and, like, being treated badly and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was all quite light and humorous and quirky and fun. And then the last few chapters were just like accidental pregnancy, which is very serious. Then potentially something wrong with the pregnancy, which was very serious. And it really shifted the tone of the end of the novel, and I don't think it was necessary. So I had to like dock a star for that, or like half a star for that. Not that I'm like mad at the trope in general, because like I said, I picked this up knowing that was an element of it, so I can't be angry at the surprise of the trope, but I just don't think it was necessarily handled well, or upon reading it I don't think it fit with the tone of the rest of the book. So that was my issue with that trope. So hand out now. Yes, overall I thought this was quite fun and sweet, but the ending does get a little more serious, so be aware of that. It was like an enjoyable read. I read it in an afternoon, so it was a very quick read for me. And I gave it, I think, like 3.25 stars maybe. Yeah, I had fun for the most part when reading it. Yes, that was my romance book for the lover prompt.
We are now on to folklore. And for this one, my prompt was to read a mythology or folklore retelling. And so I read Sister Song by Lucy Holland. So we have 3 children of King Kador as our protagonists, and we flip between each of their perspectives throughout the story. And they live in the kingdom with their mother and father, and the kingdom has always thrived with the help of their family's magic. The king was very powerful. He had magic that helped the land, and he was very connected to the earth and power and magic like that. But he let that fall to the wayside, and their mother brought in this priest who's now trying to convert them all to a different religion. They're giving up the old gods. There's not as much of a presence of that within the kingdom, and so the magic has really fallen away, and their kingdom is no longer thriving. It's struggling. There are tensions of like potential wars with other kingdoms, other areas that they are all worried about. And the three siblings throughout the story sort of find their own personal connections with the magic that used to be in the land and perhaps is still there, and perhaps they can hone for their own purposes. And then a mystery man shows up and things really take a turn in their lives. There are actually a few strange men. We have the priest who has come and is trying to bring a different religion to their kingdom, and we have a traveling sort of magician who comes to the area. He's well known within the kingdom, he's friends with the king, but there's more to him, and they definitely develop a connection with one of the children. And then we have another man and his companion who get pulled into the story, and each of the siblings has a very different relationship with him, good or bad. And throughout the book, the siblings' relationships towards each other very much changes. Their relationships with themselves, the circumstances they find themselves in, are moving and changing throughout the novel, and where we end up is very different from where we start, and it really took a turn at one point that I was not expecting. I was very pulled into the story quite early on. I wanted to know what was going on, what the sort of political and religious circumstances of their kingdom and the neighbouring kingdoms and stuff were, and how that sort of connected to each of the characters, and where that was going to take the plot. And yeah, it took the plot in a wild direction. There was one aspect of the story with a certain like prominent character in the story that is sort of like hinted at, teased, and I was like, it's gonna be this thing, like this is what's gonna happen. And I was right about that, but like throughout, because I sort of felt like that was where it was heading, there was a definite sense of like tension and almost like dread throughout the novel, or that like I felt throughout the novel, thinking that's where we're heading. But then something else happened to sort of get to that point that I really was not expecting, because I'm not familiar with the myth, the folklore tale that this is based on. So if I had been, perhaps I would have been like waiting for that moment. But I think it worked that I wasn't, because when the big thing happens that really changes things up with like the siblings, I was really taken aback. I was so shocked. I was like, has that actually just happened? Is that where we're going with this? And it took a dark turn. Not that the novel prior to that was all like happy-go-lucky or anything, but it definitely changed the tone of the novel to a much darker place than we were at. This one I really enjoyed. It really hit that sweet spot for me that I love in like fantasy stuff, where you have like warring kingdoms, opposing characters who have like different ideals, different wants, different needs, and like even if characters love each other, like how things can get between them, and how like in just a minute, just an interaction, things can go from being tense to being just awful. and like, yeah, that betrayals, or like, are they betrayals, and stuff like that. And because we're like in each of the siblings' heads, getting their thoughts and feelings about each thing, it's very difficult when they are against each other, because you're reading it going, no, they don't actually think that way. Like, if you just talked to each other, or like, you don't understand, you're hiding secrets from each other, but if you just knew what was actually going on in each of your personal lives, like, you wouldn't have this. And it just takes such a sad turn, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I also really loved the queer element. I didn't know how fully present that was going to be in the story, or how it was going to be handled. But we're set up with the king and queen having 3 daughters, but that is not the case. The synopsis quite explicitly says that although born a daughter, Cain battles to be seen as the king's son. So I thought that was going to be an interesting element, but was a little hesitant of how it was going to be handled, or how that was going to like come into play. But I thought it was done really well. I really loved them as a character, like the way the character grows throughout, and like how he ends up at the end was just so good. And the siblings' relationships with each other, it's just like heart-wrenching. I really, really enjoyed this one. And I sort of want to familiarize myself with the actual ballad. It's a folk ballad, the Trois Sisters, that this is based on. So I feel like I need to maybe look into that a bit more. And then I went to an event where Lucy Holland was. It was Lucy Holland in conversation with Jennifer Saint, who actually blurbed this. And they were talking about their books, because obviously Lucy Holland writes like folklore, British folklore retellings, and Jennifer Saint writes Greek mythology retellings. So they were just talking about retellings in general. And there was a short story, like a tale that one of the characters tells in here, which Lucy Holland, having incorporated it into here, was like, actually I want to look into that more, and I want to do even more research on that, and has now turned the like short tale that appears in here into her next book, which I think is really cool. And I'm definitely going to be picking that up, because I really liked this one. If you like mythology, folklore, retellings, if you like sort of things that have like a historical bent to them, but also have a fantasy element, this is one I would really recommend. If you like stories about families and siblings in particular, but that don't necessarily have a happy ending, or that have like fallings out, betrayals, things like that, I would really recommend this. Also, the cover, just beautiful. If you want more retellings, mythology, fantasy, folklore retellings, that have queer characters, I obviously can't like fully relate. I'm not trans, so I can't speak to the representation in terms of like a personal perspective. But I did think it was written well, and I have seen reviews from people who are trans who've said that they thought it was handled well. So yes, if you want mythology, folklore, fantasy, historical stuff, this is great. I initially was going to read a different book for this prompt, and then I thought, oh no, I'll pick this one up, and I'm so glad I did. So yes, 3 siblings, 3 deadly sins. They'll be bound by betrayal, magic, and murder. If those taglines get you, like, yeah, just definitely recommend this one. And I can't wait to read more from Lucy Holland. So that is the folklore prompt. So now we're on to the Evermore section, which was to read a book to do with time. So I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This one I picked up because I'd heard so much about it and I'd heard a lot of positive things. I have heard some mixed things, but generally positive. And I'd heard that this was really affecting and a lot of people cried at it. And like, I cry really easily and I love a good cry over a book. I feel like from that sigh and that facial expression, you can tell how I feel about this. I didn't dislike it by any means, but I think because it had been so hyped in general, I think I hyped it up for myself and thought that this was going to be a book I loved, and I didn't love it. This was translated from Japanese by Jeffrey Trouslot. Yeah, this one I liked but didn't love, and I read it a little while ago actually, and it's not really stuck with me. So this is about a coffee shop where if you sit in a certain seat you can travel in time, but you can only travel in that seat, and you can only travel for as long as it takes before your coffee gets cold. So you have to go to a point in time where you know that, like, if you want to see a particular person, they have to have been there in that time. And whatever you do doesn't have any effect really on like that moment in time. So you couldn't go back and, like, I don't know, tell someone that you loved them and then it means that they don't break up with you or something like that. Like, whatever happened still happens. You can, yeah, have conversations, but you can't really affect change. So it's supposed to be more of a, like, I guess, emotional catharsis thing than it is an actual change happening. So this is split into 4 sections. We have the lovers, husband and wife, the sisters, and mother and child. I didn't love the lovers section. That's probably my least favourite section. Husband and wife I liked a little more. The sisters I thought was very sad, and mother and child was very sad and sweet. So I feel like for me the sections got better as we went along, I guess. So that was good, at least. It took me like a little while to get into it. It took me a little while to read the lovers, but the others I read a little quicker. So yeah, if you like short books that have, like, I don't know, it's like, I guess, sci-fi in the time travel aspect, but books that have that sort of magical science fiction element but aren't focused on that. That's sort of more of a plot point to explore character connections and emotional connections, human relationships, that kind of thing, then this could be a book for you. Obviously, because so many people have liked this, I'm more of a, not anomaly, because I have heard other, like, average reviews for this, but yeah, considering so many other people have liked this, you may very well like this a lot. I really liked the premise of it. I thought the time travel aspect was really interesting, was something that I haven't come across particularly in fiction before, so that was fun. And yeah, I connected to some of the characters, didn't really resonate with others, and yeah, some parts and some relationships in this affected me but didn't yeah, I don't know, there was just some slight disconnect for me personally. I didn't cry in the way that I thought that I would, considering I cry at everything. But yeah, this was okay. This was like a 3-star for me. So pretty average rating for me. But that's not to say that you shouldn't give it a go. It was an interesting read. We're now on Midnights, for which the prompt was to read a character-driven book. That's one with like maybe not so much plot, or the plot is just the characters' everyday lives. And I decided to pick up Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is about a woman called Casey who's in her early 30s, and she's sort of like stuck in life, doesn't have a great job, is struggling to write her book. Her mum's recently passed away. She's recently got out of a relationship. Everything's a bit of a mess. And it's just about her life. She meets these 2 very different men and is sort of like reckoning with her feelings for both of them and the potential relationship she could have. I liked this. It reminded me quite a lot of like a Sally Rooney-esque kind of book where, yeah, not a lot happens other than like the messiness of the characters' lives. I think this was quite a good pick for like the Midnights prompt, because in this she struggles a lot with herself and she thinks that like she's the issue, which reminded me of Anti-Hero with "It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me." The main character is a writer, so it had that element of like dear reader sort of to it. But I thought hearing about her work on her novel and all the writing and the way that the character talks about books and writing and other people's writing, I really enjoyed. I like characters who are creative, and I really enjoyed that in our main character. This wasn't as much of a romance as I thought it was going to be. Like, her relationships with men are very important and prevalent in this, but it's less about like the actual romance between the characters and like liking the men, and more about how she internalizes relationships and views men and their interactions, and her like overthinking things or realizing things about herself and her relationships, etc. There's like almost a slight detachment in the way it's written to me, but I think because of the like vibe of this book, for lack of a better word, I think that really works with the character. So I would give this like a 3.5, 3.75. I don't think it's quite a 4-star, but it's more than just like an average 3 for me. But yeah, I liked this. If you like books about writers, if you like books about women trying to figure out their lives and messy relationships and struggling with like their mental health and topics like grief, then I would recommend this one. I'm glad I finally got round to reading it. So yeah, this was a great pick, I think, for this prompt. So that is it for this Taylor Swift themed reading challenge. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you're going to do this challenge, if you're going to follow any of these prompts. What would you read for each of these prompts? Do you have any ideas for prompts related to Taylor Swift albums or songs or anything like that? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!